What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I'm excited to enter into conversation with Byrne Power here in the Yours Truly virtual studio. I've been hanging around the YouTube subculture known as this little corner of the internet for about 6 months now. Early on, I recall hearing Paul Vanderklay mention that some guy who had moved from Alaska to Georgia, European Georgia, not United States Georgia, was trying to drum up some financial support for this guy to get his personal library shipped overseas. I thought it was an odd request and had no context for this, and went about my life making videos and pursuing other conversations here in this space. I'm a father of two daughters, a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, respectively. It may go without saying, but Taylor Swift is actually a significant figure in our home. Whether it's mornings getting dressed, singing in the shower, or driving in the car, Taylor's songs of hope, heartbreak, love, and drama more than occasionally travel through the space and time of our life and their imaginations. Recently on this podcast, I've sought out conversation about T Swift with Cassidy Vanderkamp, as well as Neil deGrade about this cultural icon, that is, Taylor, getting mixed reviews from each. Last week, a fascinating link popped up on my Twitter feed that read, "Who is Taylor Swift? Part 1. It went on to read, "At least 100 hours of research went into this two-part study of Taylor Swift. Come along with me for a serious examination of who Taylor Swift is in these times. You may think you don't care, but you really should. It is my contention that Taylor's only just beginning. This is not just about fans and music. This is not about standing for Taylor or dissing her. Part 2 will be uploaded tomorrow." The tweet tagged Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Peugeot, as well as a few others. Needless to say, my interest was piqued. I followed the link to this mysterious YouTube channel called The Anadromist, operated by the author of the tweet, Byrne Power. On the channel, I found interviews with Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Peugeot, serious cultural commentary, and an episode featuring corner acquaintance Justin Wells from the YouTube channel Justin's Morning Toffee, which I had actually listened to a few months ago. And I thought, I need to talk to this person about all things corner, all things Taylor, and all things music and culture. As my investigation of Byrne deepened, it became clear to me that the man I had heard about months ago needing books from Alaska was this man. I also was the first person to comment on the Taylor video, simply commenting first, as having been properly initiated into corner YouTube etiquette to support videos through comments to boost algorithmic attention. And I happened to beat Paul Vanderklay to the first comment punch. I'm excited to meet, connect, learn from, and converse with Byrne today as we practice some conversation craft here on Yours Truly podcast. Hit the like button to support the video and subscribe to keep up with the channel. And consider channel membership to be part of the Yours Truly faithful, to further cultivate deeper meaning and digital connection over on YouTube. So, without further delay, I give you Byrne Power, the Anadromist.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.
Byrne, welcome.
Greetings. Welcome from the real Georgia.
The real Georgia, the OG.
Yeah, well, it's been Georgia a lot longer than America has been in existence. So, although that's not what they call it here. They call it Sakartvelo, which means the land of the carts. And it's, and even Georgia, they use the name, whenever they write anything in English, they always use the name Georgia. They don't write Sakartvelo. So it's one of the official names. And evidently it was given to them by the Iranians, the Persians, over 2,000 years ago.
Wow.
I think it was Gurj at that point, which meant something like wolves.
We just don't have a context for cultural history growing up in the States like that.
Well, I'll give you a little bit more. The first place on Earth that we know of where wine was fermented was here about 8,000 years ago.
Wow.
And when I talk to the Georgians, I say, well, I think Georgia has existed as long as people have been growing grapes here and making toast with their wine. And they all agree. They all say, yep, that's us.
That's so that's an interesting, point is who is Byrne Power? How'd you get from Alaska to Georgia? I don't know much about your story. Can you kind of give us some of that?
Yeah. Well, I always say to people, well, the real question is how I got to Alaska.
Yeah.
Which is, I was living in New York City before that. So
Okay.
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, yeah, well, the thing is, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm almost, 2 weeks away or so from finishing up 69. So I'll be 69 in 2 weeks. And, but as a kid, I saw the whole San Francisco hippie thing emerge. And then in 1970, I became a part of what I turned out later was the Ground Zero Jesus People movement, Jesus People group. And so that was, kind of an epic all itself. It got me really interested in history. Our group had some problems. We kind of drifted from a sort of anarchistic sort of, we believed the Bible. We were very serious about that. We believed in Christ, but doctrinally, we were Orthodox Christians, but in practice, we were drifting towards cult status. And as I questioned that, I eventually came to understand a few things, which led me to go to the L'Abri Institute in Switzerland, where I met, for instance, Dr. Francis Schaeffer and several other people who have remained friends since then. And that kind of cemented that I wanted to go to New York. I went there to L'Abri in Switzerland because it was the only place I knew of at the time. This is like 1978, 79. The only place I knew at the time where there were Christians dealing seriously with the arts. So things have changed a bit since then, fortunately. But at that time, it was very minimal. Most Christians, the only arts they knew was, what was on the cover of Decision magazine, or, there were some music albums and such. But while I was there, I felt like, okay, I think my next stop is going to be New York City. And so I went to New York City to work on this long project about. My main question was, why did music change so much in the 20th century? And basically, at a certain point, by about 1993, I realized I had the answer to that question. And so I decided to move, because New York City just takes a lot out of you living there. And I decided to move to, New York ruins you for other big cities in America. I mean, there's no point in going to San Francisco or Boston or Chicago, because if you want a city, you're already there. And it ruins you for suburbs. So the idea of moving to some suburban spot didn't work with me. So I decided, okay, well, let's just do the opposite. Let's go really far away. And I actually thought about Canada, and I thought, I did a lot of homework for about 5 years. And then I settled on this little place. I went up to Alaska one summer, and then the next summer I moved there. And I ended up in this little town called Haines, Alaska, in which the whole valley, it's a pretty big valley, has about 2,500 people, or did up until the pandemic, when things have changed. But I worked in a radio station for 10 years. And then for reasons which are too long to go into now, I ended up not working there. But I ended up going to Europe. I started getting interested in puppetry, because my music research had told me essentially everything was going to be put into this thing. So music, films, games, it's all online. And I was thinking, so then the people who are challenging the future are going to have to do it from reality, from physical reality. And I thought about puppetry. And so I started studying that. I took trips to Europe every other year or so and started doing interviews with puppeteers and came up with some interesting ideas. Out of that, I eventually discovered Georgia. I'm collapsing this all into a rather large story into a very small nugget. But then a couple of years later, I decided to move here. I mean, yes, they had puppets, but more importantly, from my music studies, the traditional music here is just mind-bogglingly good. And they also have traditional dancing. And they have these traditional feasts they call the supra, traditional meal. And then I really enjoy talking with Georgians. They're just very interesting people, and I have made some very good friends along the way. So that's why I'm here. One of the reasons why we're talking on YouTube is because in 2019, I thought I had a job here, and then I found out how much I was going to be paid, which was basically for a month about what I would make on a long two session trip of a day in Alaska, taking people out on tours to run on rivers and see bears and things like that. And that's what I was going to make in a month. And I said, oh, I better do something else that might grow and help support me. Meanwhile, I'm old enough and might as well get some Social Security money, keep myself working. And so I eventually quit working in the organization I was working at and started doing this. So I ended up, I found Paul Vanderklay back about 2018 or so, and I ended up, I had a YouTube channel. I now have 5 of them, but I started 2 more at that time because I thought, let me do one for Georgia and let me do one for ideas, and other people are doing it. Maybe it'll work. And it has been helpful. And I really appreciated, you were mentioning the raise money to get books from Alaska. I'm amazed that people actually supported me on that, because I can't actually make any money on YouTube because of the fact I'm living in a country that is just so bizarre.
So they have. Oh, okay. The
banks don't like this country. So.
Oh, wow. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Supra. You mentioned the puppets, the embodied nature, the physical embodied nature of the puppets.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple things I wanted to hit on there. I guess so. You got into Paul. Was there another connection to you've interviewed Jonathan Peugeot? Kind of what's your kind of connection to this corner of the internet? Like those figures. Like how did that all come up for you?
I'm mostly connected to Paul, and then some of his the people who show up on his channel have shown up on mine. I have a playlist that's called With PVK and the BOM people, and those are, you'll find some of the names that you've seen over on Paul's channel. I don't go out of my way to be, someone from Paul's group. I just simply interact, and then I don't. And last time I talked to Paul a couple of weeks ago, he was saying like, we should talk more. And I thought, well, just invite me. I usually get in touch with him when I realize, okay, it's been too long. But he's very busy, and his channel is much bigger than mine. Mine has always stayed kind of small, and I'm not much of a self-promoter, except when I have to, like to raise money for to get my stuff here, which I didn't succeed at because at the last minute I realized I'd raised $20,000, but I was $13,000 short, which I thought I wasn't. But I was amazed to raise that much money, and I don't make any money on advertising. I don't make any money. I have some people who, I make a few $100s a month on people just kind of giving to me through PayPal, or they can use. I have a GoFundMe page that seems to go on forever, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So that's your connection is mainly through Paul, and he is prolific in what his output and his synthesis and connection. When you mentioned puppetry, it kind of made me think of one of Jordan Peterson's most popular conversations was about Pinocchio. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I've got the book on my shelf.
Okay, so yeah,
the things I brought back from Alaska was my entire puppetry and theater library, which is all I can tell you about it is that it is bigger than any other puppetry and theater library you're probably going to run into. I know where there are bigger ones, but certainly in this city or anywhere, so. But yeah,
the interesting thing about that, when you're talking about the digital world and everything being locked in the screens, what is, I guess you're kind of pointing at entertainment that is not going to be
entertainment.
What's that?
It's not just entertainment.
Okay, story, craftsmanship.
Everything has been put into the screen. So our love lives, our connections with people, our ability to work, all of these things end up getting, go to the site, go do this, get this out, all of this. And I've seen this coming for a long time. I mean, since the 80s. Not that I knew about apps or the internet much in the 80s, but I read the works of Jacques Ellul, who's a French Christian writer who has written some of the best books on technology. And in his books essentially said that everything, he talks about 3 environments. And he says originally we were in the environment of nature. So, the sun comes down on us, we get we go hunt, we we get our food from nature, we get, our clothing from nature. But as time went on, there were certain dangers also in nature. We were extremely exposed to the rain and the weather. We were exposed to the animals, which were extremely dangerous. We were exposed to just, tiredness and just roaming. And then we set up the social environment. And the social environment focuses mostly around the city and, of course, the growing of crops and things like that, a stationary life. And that helped us to protect ourselves from the natural world. And, if you got a walled city, you're not getting invaded by herds of elephants. But it also, and it helped human communication, helped the arts. But then there are problems with the social world. And one of those problems has to do with warfare. Disease spreads much more quickly among people who are together in one place. Most of our problems that we have to do with male and female and love and all of that come out of the social world, and to answer those questions, we started to rely, we had these little techniques like the wheel or writing or something like this. Eventually, though, those things evolved into technology as we now understand it. And so we use that and systems like, time clocks at work and things like that, all of which organized ourselves. And after a while, he says, now everything happens inside of technology. Mm. And of course, and one of the things he always points to, and he's not the only one, but basically he says that when we make something, it's never simply neutral. That is to say, it has its dark side too. Everything does. And that dark side is, when we invented the car, we didn't realize that eventually you'd be living in someplace like, I don't know, Dallas, Texas, with endless suburbs and people living where the car is the dominant thing constructing their landscape. Hmm. So no one thought of that when, they invented the, I want to say internal combustion engine. So I saw in technology that we were going to be finding a way to get ourselves further and further into it. He has another principle. Every technology is there to address an imbalance or some problem. Then what happens is that technology creates another imbalance. So then we create another technology to answer that, which then creates another imbalance. And so we're living in a world just like full of imbalances. And there's no actual answer to the question. But he says the world will not eventually be taken over. Reality, in a sense, will be pushed and pushed and then snap back. And eventually, he says, but as things go along, there are cracks of freedom. I think YouTube is still a crack of freedom. Mm. There are places where he says you can install kind of a trembling freedom, trying to create the thing that people really need. And which is as close as he gets to hope, which I think is pretty interesting.
So that is a definite angle on the meaning crisis. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
was there back in the 80s.
okay.
Way before, I mean, people started talking about the meaning Christ, and I go, yeah.
Yeah. And
For
when you're
20
talking
years.
about the city stuff, that's some of the Jordan Hall Civium Game B stuff about cities you were hitting on there with the problem with that with scale, and you were hitting on that with cars as well. Like that's a
Mhm.
terrible scale problem.
Right.
And then just the imbalances that we find ourselves in with the tit for tat or the pendulum swing of technology creates the disordered life that we're finding ourselves in. You know, way past the village, way past having like a center of gravity in our life.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned a lot about that from like Jonathan Peugeot.
Right.
So where does the puppetry come in on that for you? Where did that like light up? How did that light up?
Well, essentially, I think where we're moving, one of the big sources of disorder for us is we've become more and more divorced from our bodies.
Yes.
You know, we live here, you know, someone will put a little, you know, write something, little evil face on an emoji on a message, and we're like, you know, and it's happening all up here. It's really, you know, a little emoji doesn't do anything to you. And you know, some word that someone said with a couple extra exclamation points. There's a war going on inside of us. It's like a propaganda battle too. And one of the lowest points is that essentially, when you have mass society, any communication being pushed through it is going to end up being propaganda. One of the things I like about YouTube is that, well, there's an awful lot of propaganda out here for everybody's side. But it isn't so overwhelming that I just can't create whatever and not think about it. I can create something where I'm saying, this is an idea, but I don't have to expect anyone to follow it. Because I you know, that's the problem with, you know, I see more and more people making propaganda, even people I agree with. I mean, I've sometimes looked at Jordan Peterson stuff and said, come on, Jordan, back away. You know, you don't have to say it like that. You don't have to present it like that. You know,
And so that the puppetry is a much more
it's
embodied
not magically real, but it is physical.
physical.
And in
Yeah.
a sense, what we need, and a lot of people don't understand what you can do with puppets. I mean, when I first started studying this, I watched people creating messages, and I was saying, and ideas, and I was saying, like, wow, you can say almost anything with it. I mean, you can't probably do the kind of psychological realism you can with actors on a stage or in a movie, but you can do almost everything else. I can portray God in puppetry simply by either turning the lights all on or turning them all off. You know, I remember seeing, well, I read a small puppet play. It's called 21st Century Faust. Faust was the character who sells his soul from the devil to the devil. And we often get this. It's a medieval story. There are different versions of the story. And so in the story, he sells his soul to this character, Mephistopheles, who is the emissary of the devil. And basically he asks for everything. He says, I want to be, you know, have all this wisdom. I want to be rich. I want to have, you know, people who will listen to my every word. I want, you know, all this. I want to connect with the beauty of women and all of this. And the devil essentially says to him, oh, okay, I'll give you that. Just give me your soul right before you, you know, at the end of your life. And he goes like, yeah, there's probably not much worth living for anyway. So anyway, in my 21st Century Faust, you go through that bargain process, and then the devil says, come here tomorrow night, and then we'll go through the ritual. And the ritual basically it goes from going to the Middle Ages into the 21st century, and the devil hands him a smartphone and says, here it all is. And then he goes off. He's so amazed, right? I can do everything with this. And then he sees all these other people doing the same thing, and he goes back to the devil and he says, everyone has one. And he goes like, well, you didn't think you were the only one, did you? So, you know, that's just for children. That play wasn't done for statement. It was kind of somewhat humorous. It was meant to get people to think, but it wasn't meant for people who were, really smart. It was just meant for people who were like thinking a little bit, And I did this as part of a children's class in puppetry because I don't think people should be talked down to. I don't think this is one of the problems we have is we tend to, age appropriate, and I'm going like, no, you have to raise things up and make people jump at it, and that's how they grow. That's how children grow.
I like that. The interesting thing, something that the way that I connect to what you're talking about, I was a worship leader in a modern Christian church for about 15 years.
Yeah.
So like
I've done some of that back in the Jesus People days.
Yeah.
It was a new concept.
Yes. And when I was in high school, I wrote a research paper about Christian music in the United States. And so I studied that. I put Larry Norman in there, wrote a section on him and Stryper and all that kind of stuff. I was born in 85. So I was kind of dropped into the middle of the rise of the pop culture of evangelicalism. But but to that point, a little bit just on that puppet and the embodiment and the disconnection is, I think that's for me as I look at Christian worship and I think about things that you can't do in the digital space. So I saw a tweet a few weeks ago, and it was from Saddleback Church over in California. So Rick Warren, I don't know if you remember all that, but
I know them. Yeah.
It said, we're so excited about our metaverse church, and it showed all these little avatars in a digital church building, and they all look like World of Warcraft avatars, weird looking little things. But at the front, there was a screen, and on the screen was the live band from Saddleback Church. And I just thought, you can't take communion digitally, and you can't taste and touch digitally. So
my whole study in music led me to the following, because I've thought a lot about technology as well, is that every time you talk into a microphone, you change your relationship to the other people in the room. You become much more authoritative than you would be without it. See Taylor Swift's recent Eras tour. She's like a divinity. She's got this huge system, and there's the big Taylor behind the little Taylor jumping around on the stage, and but we don't understand how much that affects us. So I remember my little Presbyterian church in Alaska that I was going to. They had a little screen, and the screen was there for reading the words, so that you didn't have to look down at the book. And I understood they didn't want people. I was there when these rules were being created, essentially.
Yeah.
And so I understood the reason we sing these short songs. I mean, the ironic thing is the reason we sing these short songs is because they're easy to sing, and then we're free to sing them more. Whereas the whole concept of putting them on a screen locks you into the screen, even if you know the words. You may know the words to Amazing Grace, but you're still going to look at that sign the whole time. And then you start doing things like you have maybe you're singing a song. I remember a pastor did this in Alaska, and he has like video imagery of running water, and behind it, I'm saying like, no, this is entertainment now. And this doesn't belong in church. It's like, I think what we should have is a smaller pool of songs and people who know the words.
Yes, you have the problem with putting from the Jesus movement or whatever of putting the artist at the helm, is that there you get inspiration churn, where the artist is always needing new inspiration because they're tired. By the time the congregation sung this song, they've sung it 15 times, and then they want to bring a new song in, and that's not good. That's not healthy for the church.
Here's the thing about larger churches now. When you look at how they're actually arranged, they're arranged more like a theater. That is, you usually got a large sweeping audience, and then you've got maybe some sort of raised pulpit up there or a platform. And that to me, what's interesting to me is I go into a church here, you walk in and it's dark. Dark is my room. Actually, I need to turn my light on. It's dark in there.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's paintings. Other times it's just raw cement that's been there for 500 years. Mm. And, one of the things I noticed is that in the Orthodox world, they major on mystery. Whereas I remember going back to my church in Alaska, going, there's not a shred of it here. We have cheap walls with kind of some sort of flat board on the side. It's not even real wood. It is wood, but it's some sort of veneer. We've got then just white dead walls. We've got windows much too big. And the whole thing is about feeling good, feeling the spirit, feeling inclusive, feeling all of this stuff. Whereas here, the biggest holiday of the year is not Christmas, it's Easter. And the night before Easter, they walk around the building in the middle of the night. And then at the end, you get the bells and you get the daylight starting to come. But that's one of the problems. In America, we have this whole problem with negativity. So we've kind of minimized some of the darker aspects in scripture and the stories and such.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, so to kind of get to the thrust, you comment on culture, music. Did you do? Well, you said you were in radio, right?
Mm-hmm.
So was that what kind of radio were you doing? All kinds, or was it?
Well, I was in New York City, and I was on a very experimental station for a few months. Then I moved to Alaska, whereas I took that and said, I was here. And they were like, oh, that's interesting. And so I was there for about 10 years. And because we weren't connected at that time, I got there in 96 and like I said, was there for about 10 years. It took until after I was gone for them to do a stream of it, which meant I could get away with murder. I would just do crazy stuff. I did some Christmas shows, which definitely, people go like, well, that's really Christian.
Gotcha.
I would do, I would do some NPR-ish stuff. That's always boring. And I was in charge of setting things up. And I did one series of shows. I did it every Tuesday for that whole time. That was called The Word Is Spoken. I have a very large record collection, which is one of the things I need to bring here, as well as the rest of my library. But what I would do is I have thousands of records that are like spoken word records, meaning comedy, plays, news, book readings, and I have J.R.R. Tolkien reading from his work and stuff like that. So I would make up shows based on that, and I did, for instance, an 85-part history of the 20th century with just audio actualities, and I went all over the place with that, and I was quite proud of it. I have it here now. I kept it. It's all in CD, and I just downloaded it onto a hard drive so that I have, it's saved, and, but yeah, that's what I did there. So I also did things. I would put out invitations to people in the community, come bring a poem and I'll edit it for you. And I put stuff behind it or, add sound effects if I wanted. Sometimes I'd just leave it, raw. So.
Yeah. So yeah, that makes sense in this space. So you were doing cultural commentary, and now in the last several years, you've been pushing that into YouTube. You've been putting that creative work into YouTube, and then
it's more like it's just natural for me because I have so much in all of my studies. My studies of music led me then into art, led me then into technology, led me then into movies. So I know horror films as well as I know movies, as rather music. I know puppetry and the history of it as well as I know Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. So getting to that. So
Yes,
you,
I thought I'd give you a little segue there.
yeah, you've been, you that's what kind of pulled me in, because I mentioned in the intro, she's on the radio at my house, and I think it is an interesting, what's happening phenomenologically with her at this time is interesting. So what's your take? Give it to us in a, nutshell.
Before I give you my take, what's yours?
My take. Oh, great. I have one. My take is that I've got two, I guess. She's filling the cultural void of shared experience right now in a way, because um, we don't have, as a millennial, we were kind of the last people to have, we watched The Office and went and talked about The Office. The Gen Xers watched Friends. Uh, the last thing that was kind of, Marvel is now, everything's just dispersed into infinity, and Star Wars the same. And then uh, Game of Thrones was kind of the last shared thing for millennials to talk about at the office. And now and there's other reasons, there's other forces, but Taylor Swift and her relationships, and you saw it exemplified in the Super Bowl. It was like this massive cultural narrative of her
Right.
love story, on the biggest shared experience that we still have as a culture, the Super Bowl. And then with that, every A-list Hollywood actor was on every commercial for the Super Bowl, because you can't get eyes at the same place anywhere else. And
Right.
she was right there in the middle of it.
Right.
And my 10-year-old daughter, who's never watched a football game in her life, sat and watched the entire Super Bowl for the 5 shots that they would share, and if Taylor boyfriend is going to win the Super Bowl. I mean, that's incredible narrative.
Right.
And,
Right.
and we're sharing it. The other piece is that it most reminds me of, in my lived history, she actually most reminds me of Michael Jordan culturally. I want to be like Mike. Like he transcended the sport into just like this, this kind of everything feeling. Everyone thought, it transcended is, now she's not like the greatest vocalist in the world, or maybe even the greatest songwriter, but she is prolific. And so anyways, that's a few of that's kind of the general takes on.
Well, that's one thing I've come to the conclusion of, is what people are following with Taylor is not necessarily the music, but the story, her story. It's not, as stories go, there are much richer ones and deeper ones. Nevertheless, I think a lot of what you're saying is right. And that is to say that, I mean, people will spend thousands of dollars to go to one of her concerts. And that's an awful lot of money just to see someone play. But one of the things that happens while they're there is that they're interacting with other people who have a very similar interest. So that becomes very important. I'm suspicious of Swifties, but at the same time, I recognize why they are the way they are. Because to them, like right now, I know what they're all waiting for. They're all waiting for her to say, exactly. That's where they are in the story. Because she's had so many failed relationships, one way or another. They want her to find someone. And this guy, Travis Kelce, I know his brother, their family is Catholic. And I know his brother is very serious about it. And he seems to have gone through a period where he was, kind of a random jock, and doing stupid guy things. But he was getting himself in real trouble, and he had to pull out of it. And I think his brother was very instructive on that level. But I think he has some kind of faith as well. She actually grew up in a Catholic environment, as far as we know. And so I think there's something going on there, but I am sure they are not going to tell anybody about it, at least not for quite a while. They'll tell them about the marriage and stuff. I would say keep an eye on where they get married. That'll tell you something.
Church or not church?
I'm sure it'll be a church.
Hey, prediction. That's cool.
Yeah. because like I say, I can't, I wanted to find where this was. I saw some video where someone mentioned something or read something, um, where she had in some interview said she really hadn't dropped the faith of her childhood, but however, she had run into all of the progressive ideas and was looking for a way to harmonize them. But I think ultimately they can't be harmonized. But I think she will. You see, I think she would like knock back at a certain point. I think, like I say, one of the things I pointed out in the video, the two videos, and the second one is that she has never commented on the J.K. Rowling remark about a woman being a woman and someone who switches genders cannot simply become a woman. I am pretty sure, just by her emphasis upon women, that she believes the same thing. However, I'm also sure she is shrewd enough not to say that in public, because that will, I think, for instance, I would guess her and Travis have a lot more conservative conversations than we imagine from the outside.
Yeah.
You know, and I think when I see her brother, how she gets along, his brother, how she gets along with him. Her brother, I think, just finished up at Notre Dame, sorry. And so there are all these odd little clues, but she, at a certain point, see, I think she was going one way up until the Lover album. At that point, she's really being a propagandist. And so, you know, half her videos at that time have multicolor themes, pastels, multicolor, and the one, you should calm down. To which my reply is, yeah, so should you, Taylor. Shouldn't have made that video. You should, but okay. So she's adopted the social justice ethos of so much of the entertainment industry. But I still, I just know the way people move. And I still think, people are saying, oh no, she's a witch, she's demon possessed or whatever. I'm going like, no. Follow the story.
Yeah.
I think a lot of her Swifties are, but they're not seeing certain things because they're in a much more alienated mode. They're using her as a way to, they're using her as a way to substitute for something missing within themselves. Whereas I don't think, I think there are different kinds of people who have different opinions about her music and such. But like I say, I'm just keeping an eye on things. I have the feeling she will eventually detour. She might go through making a few movies first, but I think she'll detour. She'll make 13 albums.
Yeah.
But I also think it's taking its toll. I don't think we'll ever see another thing from her like the Eras tour. And this is grand. It's huge. 3.5 hours almost. Just these massive stadiums. Just an incredible kind of thing. And it's got to be absolutely, on one level, you can see that she's basking all of this love being sent towards her. But at the same time, I am sure, we haven't seen the kind of her having anxiety moments since the Lover era, which means it's been about 4 years since then, 4 or 5 years, depending on what you're looking at. But I have the feeling that whatever she is feeling has been much heavier, But like I say, we don't know. And that's one of the things. The Swifties are always looking for clues. And
they're playing her game.
Yeah.
The other piece of this, I had another take on her is that, like her and Ed Sheeran at their heart are actually songwriters. They're not pop artists at their at their base level. They're actually songwriters, and I think that actually has a different foundational level than just a performer like Justin Bieber or Katy Perry or these things in the past. That those things burn out because there's not something underneath. And I think that that's what's fascinating. She has a very large catalog. My connection, my father-in-law was the first time I think I really paid attention to Taylor Swift's like her first album or two, he was listening to Tim McGraw. Like he
Right.
he like, I like this song. He liked the Beatles.
Right.
He liked kind of the early Beatles stuff, kind of the happy, poppier stuff. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, my father-in-law is listening to this 15-year-old, you know, okay. And then for me as a person, it was the 1989 album. And I think the artist is Ryan Adams. I could be wrong.
Yeah, he did a version of it.
He covered the whole album. And he was
Right.
kind of like an indie rock guy. I was like, well,
I
that's
know him.
interesting.
I know his music pretty well. So
Yeah, I was like, well, that's really interesting that this guy. And so I listened to that album. I kind of made some covers at the house and stuff, you know, just having fun with it. Uh, and I liked that I've always had a pretty soft spot for a good pop beat, good pop melody.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so she was starting to really dial in on that. And then, and now my kids are just going through all of, my 14-year-old loves her early stuff because she's living like those songs, her early songs out, and my 10-year-old who pays attention to culture, she has kind of that sense. She likes all of her more culturally, the stuff that's hitting the culture. She actually pays attention to. So I think it's interesting. I think that, like you said, there's a lot more going on than she's a witch. What the name of your second video? I can't remember the title. Is it something like?
Goddess, witch, or Christian.
Yeah, goddess, witch, or Christian. I love that. And that is, I mean, that's the question going on. And um, her latest album, controversial because she actually does a gospel metaphor about her last relationship in there with like I would have died for you type thing, for your sins or whatever.
I think if you start looking for that stuff, there's a lot more of it in there than you imagine. I think the way I look at it is, to me, she starts off doing this country pop music. Now, I am a long-time fan of, well, fan is the wrong word, long-time listener to lots of country music. And I recognize it as being pretty much pop music. That is to say, more than country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not Hank Williams, it's not Johnny Cash, it's not Loretta Lynn, it's not all of these people. It's related pretty much to Shania Twain and the Dixie Chicks. It's like someone who, I'm sure she eventually hooked up to more of the history, but she was part of that moment. She broke out of that with the 1989, I think, Red album starts to break out.
Mm-hmm.
And then she moves into this pop world. And then, of course, there's all the drama with Kanye and all that stuff. But I think also at that time, she moves to New York, and this really changes her outlook. Because I lived in New York 16 years. I know how it can do it. Didn't change mine, though. So, because you see, the thing is, I've always been, it's like, oh, you think you know something? And my thought is like, yeah, right. It's like, we're all just, it's too easy for us all to coast. And especially if you haven't seen much in life, it's so easy to basically just go along with what everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
And I guess this whole period in my life when I was in my teens, where I was in the Jesus people and saw all this stuff, that really just, and then we were in danger of becoming a cult. All of that just went, and I said, yeah, okay, that's never going to happen like that again. I'm not going to, I'm pretty good at whenever something's kind of cultish, I'm like, ooh, I don't want to have much to do with that. However, there's still people, and they need to be talked to. But she makes this change. So suddenly her music radically changes. It goes from her saying, please love me. Oh, and look, New York City. And I'm sitting there, Taylor, you didn't go to New York that deeply. I can tell you things you never saw, because you were too protected. You couldn't end up in the places I ended up seeing. It's like, I've seen real death, bullet holes in people, that kind of thing. I've seen real degradation of the human existence in New York City. And I've felt real fear and terror at certain times. Never knew where the drug dealers were or who they were shooting that week or whatever. You know, why is that weird smell in the apartment? Oh, it's the guys cooking crack in the bodega downstairs. You know, so, you know, I felt all this weird stuff, and I'm going like, yeah, you know, when you said welcome to New York, that wasn't exactly what you were talking about. So, but then she kind of comes out of that Reputation era, and I will understand why she went into it. But then she comes into the Lover era, and it's almost like she's too smug or something. And I'm actually really grateful for the pandemic, because it came and took. There are some great songs on that album, but many of them are also these messagey songs that I just, I'm like, Taylor, you need to calm down. You know, it's like, so. But then she did like I like the Folklore and Evermore albums. I've heard people describe those as folk. I'm sorry, those are not folk music. Those are very well made, mellow pink records with some acoustic instrumentation. And then I really like Midnights. And I think something happened to her during this period. And of course, we don't know what happened with the more long-term relationship, and that had some sort of effect on her. And then she comes out, and then this whole Travis Kelce thing, which I think is actually very interesting. And I think one of the reasons why people are so excited about it is because it's the first time you're going like, yeah, he's a good guy. He's not a man boy like so many of the other guys she was hanging out with. You know, he does not seem postmodern.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true.
He doesn't. I mean, I've listened to him talking on his brother's podcast on YouTube. This guy is not particularly politically correct. You know, I am sure when you get him away from the camera, he says all sorts of things. You know, because he just strikes me as being a guy who's like, yeah, you know. But in a sense, that's a good thing. You know,
I think so.
Because I think a lot of the people she was hanging out with were famous for, you know, music and movies and things like that, but not for. See, the thing is, his realm of fame is so completely different than hers. But that's actually a good thing. And you know, listening to him talk and stuff, and I know what he doesn't. You know, I can hear him going like, "Yeah, I don't know what that means." And he just like, I go like, "Yeah, the guy is essentially an interesting jock guy. I like him." You know, and I think that he doesn't overlap with Taylor in many of the kinds of ways where Taylor is seen by everyone, which is what makes it interesting. You know, one would love to be a fly on the kitchen wall when they're alone, if one wasn't violating their privacy. You know,
Yeah, I haven't actually thought about this, but it's actually similar to like Carrie Underwood marrying a hockey star.
Yeah. Also, she has those songs from her earliest days where she is kind of the dorky nerd girl looking at the guys who are, you know, and he's the kind of guy she would have been looking at.
Yeah, but there's more to life.
He's been trapped in high school for a very long time.
Yeah,
and he gives her a chance to graduate.
Yeah, because she said even that early song, "There's more to life than marrying the boy on the football team." You know, that was like a defense mechanism.
Maybe not. But no, you know, eventually all relationships get, you know, they have their element where you have to practice and keep doing it over and over. We'll see, you know, we'll see. But I think that, like I say, she has an interesting trajectory. And it's a trajectory that most people don't have in music. Most people, they start off with a few great albums, and then eventually they have to become more and more commercial.
Yeah.
Either through studio pressure or whatever to sell records. You know, it's like, you know, so many rock bands from the 60s and 70s had to put out their obligatory disco type record at the end of the decade because they were told, hey, this is selling, you got to do it. So, whereas Taylor's just the opposite. She starts off in this pop mode and then slowly moves, in a way like the Beatles, slowly moves into a much more artistic mode. And I think that's where she is now. So I think that's an interesting trajectory.
And like the Beatles, you know, she's in control of the music that she's creating.
No, she is much more in control than they were.
I I agree. I'm just saying that it
Yeah.
comes from to that point of it, her being a writer more than a performer. Even
Right,
though
right.
she's performing at her highest level right now, she didn't start out as just the image of a performer. She was a little
Yeah.
songwriter,
Well,
you know.
one of the things we generally don't understand about the Beatles is how, yeah, they were in control of writing their own music. Good for them. They had George Martin in their stable to help produce the stuff they were thinking of, which was very important. But when it came to what they did with their money, they were totally, they had knew nothing. Whereas Taylor seems to know everything
Well,
because both her parents are financial whizzes in some way or another.
and
So
that's definitely another thing that she did that I think. I mean, she's recreating every album that ended up being stolen from her. You
yeah,
know, that to me is
and
and
I've been comparing them, and I'm amazed that she can get the same tones with her voice that she did when she was, 19. I'd be very interested to see a remake of the debut album because and the vault songs on there. I want to see if she does. Didn't they? You saw that song she wrote about 9/11.
yes.
I'd be very interested to see her take on that because obviously her voice there is very young. She's not going to do exactly the same thing. But I think she's got stuff locked away in the pre-period and also connected to that I'd really like to see her. What happens if she goes back to that?
In the first video, or no, second video, I have it right at close to the 20-minute mark, where you highlight her breaking the fourth wall by going to like this 90-year-old's
That's
house.
beyond breaking the fourth wall. I mean, there's a I think it's the Graham Norton show. There is an interview with her, and John Cleese is there, and there's some other person there. I think was it anyway. She's being interviewed, and she's talking about inviting these people over to her house for a listening party. Now the other people are looking at her like, why do you want to invite them into your house for a listening party? And then the question was, how did you do it? And she says, well, it took me months. I would see who was writing what, and then I would watch them for a while to see what kind of person they were. And they all just like backed up on the couch because nobody does that. That's one of the things that made her career. There is, if you go to the archive.com, the Internet Archive, I forgot to get it for the video, but there is the original page in which she says, all you have to do is like me.
Yeah.
And it's this, I always think Taylor is still, in a sense, a 13-year-old girl who wants people to like her, not Facebook like her, but she wants someone to like her because the way I look at it is she spent most of her up to say the age of 10 or so basically being a pretty normal girl. She seems to have had friends and such in primary school. And then she enters this middle school where there's these kids from the other side of the tracks, and then a few people who are more well off, all going to this one school, and they hated her. And then that kind of continued into high school as well. And I think that was such a shock for her because I think she'd been going along fairly normally. And then, bam, she gets hit by the reality of what happens when people start to gossip about you and form a kind of an instant dislike just based on whatever. So like, yeah, the weird kid who's always playing the guitar, she's always sitting around writing songs. It's like, and I've heard people recently say, I heard these psychologists say, I think she might be on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, and I'm sitting there going like, oh, just shut up. She's just, I know these people, they're not on the autism spectrum. They're just very creative.
Yeah.
And by trying to pigeonhole her like that, you're getting away from what actually makes her interesting.
Well, and what making her interesting, breaking that, you said that's doing more than breaking the fourth wall. That when she has liked people,
knocking the building down.
She comments on. She has commented on people's, stories or reposted them, on her Instagram or whatever. But you said something akin to it makes her. It almost endears her as like a saint or an angel to
No,
her.
it's like the idea that this
That she
this
descends,
musical
she
star
descends.
that you practically worship is
Mhm.
out there hovering around and maybe looking at your internet information on your social media, and she might choose to show up. Although, you know, the actual ratio of how many times she showed up somewhere versus how many fans she has is astronomical. It's
Yeah.
like winning the lottery, you know. But the idea of that, you know, that some girl you're invited over to this house to listen to the new Taylor Swift album, and then Taylor's there and she's making cookies for you. It's just like mind blowing, you
Yeah,
know.
that's incredibly powerful to create that hope, or to that could be a reality in your life.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
that the spirit of Taylor is ever
And
watching.
that's where things start to get dangerous, is
Yeah.
because she was playing with,
Mm.
in a sense, I think she was doing for other people what she wished someone would have done for her, and that
Yeah.
is to say, to notice her. I, in my heart, I think that the real problem originates, of course, with her family, and there's all the stuff we don't know. All we know is that she must have felt at some point like she got kicked under the rug or something, and no one was watching her, because the central theme in her concerts, and when if did you see the Eras Tour movie?
I didn't. I didn't. My
Well,
kids didn't.
it's worth watching. But the central thing is, I don't know, it's worth watching with your children. The central thing is, has there ever been anyone who, a musical star who just simply just absorbed all the love from everyone, and it just made her stronger and stronger and stronger? You know, she's like this beast, this just simply absorbs everything and then becomes this gigantic creature. And she knows it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you watch her video on for the Anti-Hero, she knows she's this giant who comes into town. And of
Yeah.
course, the ironic thing is that makes her just as isolated as she ever was in junior high school and middle school and high school.
To be known. Mm. To be
Everybody
truly.
knows who she is, and nobody can go over and visit, not without going through a lot of security.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Well, it's a weird form of wish fulfillment. You know, you wish everyone to, I want people to like me. I really want people to like me. I really do. And then they do. And then too many of them do. And then they can no longer talk to you. So she comes across to me. I mean, I've even one of the comments in my second video, the one on the Anadromist channel. There's the Anadrome, which is mostly for music and stuff, and then the Anadromist is more for ideas. And I put the one goddess, which are Christian, on that one because we're dealing more with religious issues, whereas the other one is more biographical, dealing with Taylor. But they, of course, work together. And but she is, what can I say? Yeah, she's created this zone. She wants people in it, but at the same time, I always get the feeling watching her. Oh, I know what I was trying to get to. Is there are these people who have all these conspiracy theories about her. I think part of that is the bigger you get, the more people will start to attach. You know, you just attract more hatred. People will start to conjure up conspiracy theories. How could she make it? And it's like she must have be in league with the devil. And I'm sitting there going like, nah, just watch her whole career. There's nothing like she went off to Switzerland and then joined the people at Davos, and then they all anointed her, and she, there's nothing like that going on. And she doesn't come across like that. She comes across as, I mean, when you back away and actually find her talking to someone, she's still this dorky kid, and she seems to be humble and at the same time really wants that attention. So there's this big aspect of narcissism, which is what she talks about in the song Anti-Hero.
Yeah.
Of course, she puts it in this ironic way to deflect from the fact that she's actually saying that. She says, they say. But the truth is, she knows that.
Yeah.
you know, and
That
come on.
you talked earlier about the shadow side of things, like, and coming into awareness of that is probably actually good. Um, and and the one of the points you made in that video, I don't remember which one it was, where you pointed out she took one of her songs and turned it in, did a rock version of it. She started
Yeah.
out on electric guitar. Which one, what song was that?
We are never getting back. We are
Yeah,
never ever getting back
I
together.
ran into that on Spotify just a few weeks ago, and I was kind of, oh, this is kind of interesting. And you talked about how it's like one of your favorite things that she did. And,
Yeah,
and
because
you also have some stuff on like what happened with music, and maybe tie that into from there, but also what happened to rock and roll, like those two
I mean,
things.
like, well, she comes along at a period in which essentially rock music, as it was known in the latter part of the 20th century, was dying. What happened was when Britney Spears came along, Britney Spears and the electronic music scene came along, suddenly things started shifting away from the musician to the producers. And at that point, what happened was, I think to me, the last great rock act to emerge was White Stripes. And I think that, but even here, once you get to the aughts, most of that music nobody knows. It's not like, I mean, the last bands that everyone heard of that was like rock music. Well, you had some bands like, I don't know, Offspring and some of the, Green Day, some of that stuff. But before that, you had, Pearl Jam, and you had Nirvana. Those were big rock acts. But rock music doesn't produce that sort of thing anymore. It may in the future, but the idea of rock or music even as revolution is over. It's because it's all about the thing that brings us everything, which is our connections, the internet, smartphones, social media. That's where you look around. Everyone's not listening to music anymore. They're all staring at their palms. So that's why, for me, puppetry is important, because it is something, to me, it's still, and I've got recordings of some of the puppeteers I've met, some very interesting people. This one guy in the Czech Republic goes, yeah, I always thought puppetry was kind of underground. And it is, because that's the kind of thing that will eventually show up. I mean, we're still in the 2020s. By the 2050s, 2060s, people will be hearing about puppetry. I'll be dead, but I will have been there.
I have ideas that things are going to become more hyper localized because things are becoming more expensive. And like, I live in a town of about 10, 15,000 people, kind of like an hour and a half from any other city.
Right.
And
are you in the north or the south or the middle?
Arkansas.
Where?
It's north central, northeast part. And so like the foot of the Ozarks, and
the northwest is probably the coolest part of the state. Is that correct?
That's the hip section up there in Fayetteville, Bill.
Probably some going on or something.
Yeah, and I live about 45 minutes from the folk music capital of the United States, called Mountain View, Arkansas. There's they have an Ozark folk festival and stuff up there, but so much is we're gonna want to embody these things, and we've thought that there's kind of like that. What is that scripture said, "A prophet's without honor in his own hometown"? Sometimes, like, we look over what's right in front of us because we think, oh, there's something so great out beyond. And I don't know, I think some of that will change because we're going to be so starved and hungry for, like you're talking about, like, actual connection.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm putting my money down on things like puppetry, but not just puppetry, but dance, like ballet, things like that. I have friends here who are dancers, and it's just amazing to watch them. And you go and you realize both puppet shows and dancers, video doesn't really capture. You watch it, going, but as soon as you see them live, you're like, whoa, because something's actually happening in front of you.
Yeah.
And I think David Bowie once said that he felt that things were going to get so high tech that in the future, we would just want to come home from whatever we were doing, although now the tech is in the home, and touch wood.
Yeah.
You know, and he was saying maybe rock music is like that, or going to be like that, which is an interesting idea. But literally with puppetry, yeah, it is wood. So not all of it, but certain parts of it are. I have friends who are carvers and such.
The other piece of that you mentioned earlier in the Georgian culture, you talked about supra, and I'm actually about to have a conversation with John Heers coming up. Do you know John in the YouTube space?
Hmm.
He goes around. I was at Symbolic World with Jonathan Peugeot recently,
right.
and this guy John Heers, he has a podcast called Heavy Things Lightly, and he does Georgian supras all over, like as a part of his First Things Foundation.
Okay.
And he goes and he brings, I guess, the cuisine, and then he runs the supra as whatever I don't know the MC name of that.
Tomato.
The Tomata, yeah, he does that.
Yeah.
And so things like that, he makes mention of, like we're talking about these embodied experiences. He sees as a key to the future, and the idea even of a toast is it's formalizing things. We've deformalized and secularized, de-ritualized so many things that
right. The thing about the toast, the Georgians take them very seriously.
Yeah.
And they end up being, some of them can be very poetic. Some of them can be from the heart. I actually passed the test when I first went to the first one I was at. The toasts were going around, and it came to me the second time. The first time I said something like, here's to Georgia, blah, blah, blah. So, but the second time I said, here's to hoping Georgia doesn't lose its soul with all of the things coming into it from the outside, the new world and everything like this. And I went on for a little longer. It's not supposed to be short. And then I had one of the older men come up to me, actually the father of the man who invited me, the guy who invited me, came up to me afterwards and said, "You're one of us." I said, "Thank you," because I got it. Then I heard a friend of mine, I have an American friend here who's married to a Georgian woman, and he had a couple of British friends come. So he said, "Okay, well, let me take you to a supra." Now, if you know anything about the British mode of toasting, it is always sarcastic. It is always got laced with kind of dark humor, and so it's always as they say, taking the Mickey, taking the piss. Kind of making sure people don't think they're important or whatever. So these guys use their humor, did not go over well at all. And they were, my friend John said, "Yeah, I made that mistake." Because I think it would be the same with any kind of person who's centrally kind of postmodern, so that they can't take things seriously.
Yeah, that's part of this, that we've lost a sense of the sacred, like that you're violating something sacred right now, or we're misplacing it into things that it shouldn't be, that it's like inverted or something. But
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the difficulty with Taylor, though, is that it's too easy for people to use her as a substitute, use her story as a substitute. It is kind of an addictive story. I mean, I've dug in deep enough that it's like I'm sitting there going, well, I hope Travis and her, and I'll watch some short video clip of him waving at her during a concert or something, and a little thing in me goes, oh. I'm not immune to the story, and that's what makes her so powerful. Like I said also in the first one, she is hardly done. She's just revving up, because I think the second part of her life is going to be something we should watch out with joy and with empathy and with a little bit of apprehension, depending on how she, what forces are moving in her. But like I say, I am hopeful that there's something good happening behind the scenes that we're not witness to. And that's how it should be. We don't need 100 million Swifties all commenting on some sort of statement she makes in private. So
What would it look like for her to begin to give herself away? I think that's, give herself away in marriage, but also give her, her greatness away in a way, like the idea of sacrifice as a mom, as
mm,
as a
I
person to.
think I think three things are going to, four possibly, will change her whole perspective. One, her mother has had many problems. Eventually, her mother and father are going to die. That's really going to change everything for her because they've been so instrumental in helping her. But also, we don't know exactly what that relationship is. Secondly, I think getting married will do a lot. And thirdly, having children will change everything for her. And the other thing that can possibly do it is if the fans get crazy.
Mm.
And I think she's actually sensitive to that. That I don't know if you got to that point at the end of the second video where she's just sitting there. This is from the Miss Americana documentary, and just saying this. She's like basically in tears, saying, "This isn't about music anymore. What's happened?" And I think she is very well aware. All those people who follow her around. She doesn't understand. She's at the center of a storm. She doesn't understand what it all means. At the same time, she's more than happy to promote that storm. It's like, yeah, it's just a fascinating thing.
It's interesting thing where it's like wanting to be loyal to these fans, to these supporters, but at the same time, what is it creating something else?
Right.
That's not just that kind of like fun relationship.
Well,
Where it becomes fanatic.
Michael Knowles over on the Daily Wire, who's also Catholic, says he really hopes that she gets married and has children because just her having children will set a template for so many of these young girls, which is kind of a good thing because right now where we are is like, who knows? I mean, I'd hate to be like 25 years old or 20 years old right now and be looking, because the mode for looking is so bizarre. And
speaking of disembodied, swipe right, swipe left.
Yeah.
Well,
and you also have to just use visual cues, and a word or two. It's like if someone says, "I'm a Christian," what does that mean? That could mean any number of things. It could just mean you wear a cross around your neck. There's lots of different kinds of Christians.
The explicit versus the implicit parts of faith.
Yeah.
I think so. Man, well, I want to encourage people to move on from here and to go to your channel. You've got so much. I'm going to spend some more time over there. You said you have you have like an introduction video, like where should I go from here? And like one of your first, and you said one of your most popular works is it's like a 6-hour video on how we got here. Is that?
No, it's not a 6-hour video on how we got here. It's a 13-part series, and one of the videos is 6 hours.
Okay.
No, I start off like just lightly. The first one's like 15-minute introduction, and I didn't know where I was going. Yeah. But the closer we get to the present, I think it's a 3-hour. 2020 is a 3-hour one. Then I have one from the one that's really long is from 2011 through 2019, right up to the pandemic, because there's just so much to cover there. And this is also where normally I had a music section in each one, but there's no more music section in that one because music no longer mattered in that sense. What mattered was social media, the arguments, Gamergate, all this other stuff mattered, Yeah. So, but where are we going? One of the interesting things about this moment in history is no one can predict where we will be in 2030. I mean,
I feel like that's why people are reaching backwards right now towards orthodoxy, towards the old world, towards tradition.
They need to. I mean, what I tell people is you really need to start reading. You really need to get involved with history of whatever you're interested in. You need to understand. So the reason for my How We Got Here series is precisely, and it seems to have worked for everyone who's watched it. They start after a while, it's like they get longer and people are going like, when's the next one coming? So it may be 6 hours, but I've got it broken down so you can come back later and go to the next section. But they start off, like I say, half hour, an hour. Eventually, it's like hour and a half, 2.5 hours, and then I couldn't stop and what I'm doing is I'm using mostly footage. So there's a lot of visual material, a lot of trying to understand why everything changed so much so I started World War II, and I say, like, basically everything we're living in is still the trauma from World War II. And people don't realize, people today will say, oh, the world is crazy now, it's at war. And I'm going, like, do you realize like 70 million people died between, say, 1939 and 1945? A little bit on either side besides that. But, this is nothing compared to that. But what this is that makes it so different is all of this comes into our heads and makes us feel like it's worse.
Yeah. We don't have a good, a really, like, what is, that deep trauma point to really orient ourselves towards, as opposed to something else. We see one thing happen and we're traumatized, and it didn't even happen to us. And it wasn't somebody we knew. It wasn't our family. It wasn't these things. And, the interesting thing for me, as I've been reflecting a little bit about that time, maybe because of Oppenheimer or something, but, is, I was born in 85. And so I'm about to be 40, and that means that World War II ended 40 years before I was born. And I'm like, oh. And in my mind, it was ancient history growing up.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not that long ago.
Like, I mean, just look at material on the internet from the 80s, and it'll seem like ancient. And then you realize, oh, it just keeps changing.
Yeah.
So my thought, what I want people to do is to realize that, like I say, I'm getting close to 70. Well, heck, I feel like sometimes I was born 10 years after World War II. And when that happens, you get around, you go like, okay, well, this is life. This is how it is now. We got rock and roll. We got rock music when I got older and stuff. You look around, oh, there are people protesting. All right. And you don't realize 10 years before you were born, the world committed suicide or tried to.
Yeah.
So it's just like right now, there are people who were born, say, in 1999. They have no idea what happened in 2001.
Yep.
And you'll meet those people and you go, really? I remember when I met the first person I ever did working who was born in 1968. And I said, so you have no idea what happened in the 60s? She goes, but it should be the people living who pass those things on. But they aren't doing it. And that's what I want to encourage people to do, is to dig into history, dig into time, your time, figure out where you are. Where are you located in this? Understand not only the history. I think we always start with the history of things near us. So, the city, the state, the country, and then you move on to the nearest countries, the world. Probably Americans would more naturally gravitate towards Europe, but then you just keep broadening it so you have some sort of sense of the world. Although Americans are not really good at doing that, because we tend to think, well, why do I need to do that? It's just like, and everyone doesn't have to do that, but you should still have some idea of where you are in history.
Yeah, it is important. I didn't, as a kid, so my dad was adopted from Korea. He's half Korean. And so he was adopted to this tiny farm town that he still lives in the house he grew up in. He moved back. We moved back there when I was young. But he had, this story of coming from the Far East. It is a part of my life, even though I was raised, for the most part. I was born in Fort Worth, moved to Nashville when I was for a couple of years and then moved to Arkansas when I was about 7.
Well, what do you know about the Korean War?
Well, I can tell you, I don't know as well that it.
You should know, because That is most likely why you're quarter Korean.
Yes, that is why. So I know that we were, quote unquote, supposed to be trying to keep Korea from falling to communism, and that the Korean government was subsidizing the American and Western soldiers with sex, gambling, or prostitution, gambling, and alcohol or whatever. And so there's a whole swath of half American, half Korean children that were adopted, and that was actually related to a Christian mission.
Right.
That coming. My grandparents went to a tiny Methodist church in a town of 350 people. That a missionary came and talked about the need for Korean adoptees.
Oh yeah, yeah. In my little town in Alaska, there were like 3 or 4 Koreans that were adopted there, and they were. None of them were old enough to be born in the 50s, but nevertheless, there was such poverty in the country for so long after that.
Yeah, and it was a shame. It was a shame on the government. There was a huge journalistic effort to reveal what had happened because they had abandoned all these children in the 80s. And so whenever my parents actually went to the 88 Olympic Games through a Christian chaplaincy organization connected to Carl Lewis. And before that, they kind of did like a public apology and repentance for what they had done to all these expats, nationalists. And during COVID, the Korean government sent my dad some N95 masks as he could get them because of that. It was kind of a gesture.
But then knowing more about Korea will lead you to understanding 2 other cultures. One of them is Japan, which has had a really bad history with Korea, and the other one is China, which is not that much better, but different. But that's the thing, is you start with, for me, it's like I start with questions and move out. I mean, see, on my mother's side, it all stops in Ukraine. And she didn't even know that. I figured it out because, and Poland, which were like the charnel houses of Europe. It's just like how many millions and millions of people died in Poland and Ukraine. They say Ukraine lost half its population before, say, 1950 in the 20th century. It's just these incredible stories.
That's another one of those nexus points, like Korea was a nexus point with these cultures, Ukraine, the East and the West. And
also, all of them were desirous of owning it. But evidently, the Koreans are kind of a prickly people at times, So it just gets so complicated. Well, evidently, Christianity came to Korea. Do you know the story?
Not specifically.
They went there. I think it was in the 18th century. I think. Then the whoever was the feudal lord of Korea just was like out, killed all the missionaries he could, chased the rest out. They left a Bible behind in Korean, and it started from there.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
The other piece for me was my mom's family had done a lot of genealogical research and traced like part of our heritage back to England, and we're direct descendants of George Washington's uncle because he didn't have any children. And then into the Swiss, and but my dad recently did the 23andMe and found out that he's half Irish, and so so I'm Irish Korean.
Well, I've got an Irish name and I'm not Irish, so I did do some research and found out, my family was Irish about 500 years ago.
Wow.
But it has nothing to do with my name. So yeah.
Well, this has been good, Byrne. This has been
your name
good.
Is Christian?
Christian Baxter, man.
You're not like Baxter, who's a Christian. You're actually Christian Baxter.
Yeah, my name is Christian.
Yeah. Because it could be read like,
yes,
I'm Christian Baxter.
Yeah, no, Christian YouTube. That's kind of a meme in and of itself. But yeah, but yeah, man, thanks for coming on, talking to me about Taylor Swift and the like. And again, people need to go check out it's the Anadrome and the Andromist.
Yeah, you should put both links. Put them so part 1 is first and part 2 is second.
Yeah.
Put in your description section. Go down there. Go from there.
Follow
They're only
the
an
rabbit
hour
trail.
or so each. So, which for me is obviously short.
Well, man, thank you again, and we'll keep bumping into each other here and there on this corner of the internet.
Great, and we'll talk in a moment about getting the files. So
That sounds good. All right, man.
okay, from Georgia, Drolabit, which means temporarily. That's what it literally means. It means we'll see each other in a while.
We'll see
Just
you.
be gone from each other a little while.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Byrne. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and staying with us until the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection are truly meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and believe that these discussions bring real value to your life, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Your feedback and interaction are crucial in making this space even more meaningful. Also, I've opened up channel memberships on YouTube. By joining, we can foster a stronger community of connection and support the continuation of more conversation craft. Membership is set up to foster this in 3 ways. Level 1, connect via members-only community posts for channel feedback, behind-the-scenes moments, and supportive membership branding on comments. In addition, Level 2, get to watch podcasts a week before they air, along with other unique members-only videos. At Level 3, join scheduled monthly focused small group discussions with other kindred spirits from all over the world. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. Together, we can cultivate meaningful, supportive digital community right here in this little corner of the internet. We'll see you next time.